14 men ventured deep into the wilds of Arkansas, chasing after a single fugitive. None of them would return alive. It was the year 1863, and plantation records across 3 neighboring counties began to show the same haunting name in their fugitive logs, a name that soon became a curse among bounty hunters and trackers alike. Some refused the job entirely, while others demanded double their usual fee, knowing that hunting this man was as good as signing their own death warrant. The local authorities buried what really happened, hiding it so well that for more than 100 years, families of those men were told their loved ones had simply disappeared during the war. But the truth, preserved in dusty courthouse basements and locked away in private collections, tells a far darker tale, one of deliberate violence, impossible endurance, and a cold, mathematical mastery of killing that shattered every notion of what an escaped slave could ever be. Before we continue with the story of the man history came to call the Reaper of Miller County, we must first understand the world that shaped him and the brutal forces that turned human property into one of the most efficient killers the Arkansas frontier had ever seen. In the autumn of 1862, Miller County lay on the collapsing edge of Confederate control. The land stretched along the Red River, over 60,000 acres divided among 43 plantations. Each was its own kingdom, ruled by cotton, timber, and flesh. The Hutchins Plantation, where our story begins, sprawled across 4,000 acres of rich black soil that grew cotton so fine it fetched top prices even as the war strangled the South economy. The manor stood on a small rise, a 2-story house of whitewashed cypress. 12 rooms in all, its galleries catching what little breeze the summer heat allowed. But it wasn't the house that defined the Hutchins property. It was the quarters, not simple rows of slave cabins, but an entire compound system designed by owner Robert Hutchins himself. 32 buildings held 214 enslaved people, arranged by their skills and market value. The blacksmith and carpentry shops, along with the tannery, occupied the eastern edge. The field hands lived to the west, and beyond them, fenced off on its own, stood the punishment house. Robert Hutchins believed in what he called systematic correction. He studied plantation management treatises, exchanged letters with other slave owners across the South, and developed a method he named calibrated discipline, a system that matched each offense with specific punishment, executed with what he called scientific precision. He kept meticulous records of every beating, listing the tool used, the number of strikes, and the result on behavior. Those ledgers, still preserved in the Arkansas State Archives, reveal a mind obsessed with control, a man who reduced human lives to data points in an equation he believed he had perfected. Among the enslaved population, one man stood apart, not because of privilege, but because something about him unsettled even the overseers who commanded him. The plantation documents record his name only as Bass, purchased in 1856 from a Tennessee trader for $900, an extraordinary sum justified by a single note in the ledger, unusual physical strength and mechanical aptitude. Bass stood 6'2", lean and hard, built not for show but for efficiency, the kind of body forged by relentless labor that would have broken most men. He worked as a blacksmith and farrier, which gave him access to tools, to metal, and to knowledge of how things were made, and more importantly, how they could be destroyed. The plantation's white blacksmith, a German immigrant named Otto Briner, once wrote in a letter to his brother, "Bass has a mind for mechanics beyond any craftsman I've ever known, no matter his station. He can look at a lock or mechanism and instantly understand how it works. It troubles me, though I can't say why. What unsettled Briner was simple. Intelligence in a slave was dangerous. But intelligence paired with silence was terrifying. Bass spoke only when addressed, answered in as few words as possible, and kept a face that betrayed nothing. The house servants whispered that he'd learned that silence in Tennessee, that his former master had tried to break him using methods so cruel they left scars across his back like a map of pain. But whatever broke inside him, it wasn't his will. It was his capacity for mercy. When the Civil War erupted, Bass had already spent 6 years on the Hutchins plantation. While others whispered about Union troops and freedom, he said nothing. When others tried to run and suffered Hutchins's calibrated discipline, Bass remained still. He shod horses, repaired tools, and forged chains and shackles with steady hands and eyes that never lifted to meet those of the white men above him. Robert Hutchins believed he'd found a perfect slave, gifted, obedient, seemingly content. What he didn't know was that Bass had spent those same 6 years studying every inch of the plantation, memorizing patrol routes, cataloging weapons, and waiting for a moment that demanded perfect timing and absolute ruthlessness. That moment arrived on November 3rd, 1862, when Hutchins made the mistake of taking Bass with him to the county seat. The trip to Texarkana was routine, a quarterly journey for legal matters, supplies, and social appearances that held the planter class together. Hutchins brought Bass along to tend the horses and load the heavier items. What he didn't realize was that Bass had been waiting for exactly this, a chance to leave the plantation, to enter a town where several roads offered escape, and where the chaos of war made strange movements easier to overlook. The day passed uneventfully until late afternoon, when Hutchins stopped at the county courthouse to file papers about a property dispute. He left Bass outside with the wagon, something that would have been unthinkable before the war, but was now common with so many white men away fighting. Merchants, soldiers on leave, and farmers filled the streets. No one paid attention to one more enslaved man standing beside a wagon. What happened next unfolded so fast that even eyewitnesses could barely piece together the sequence of events. Around 4 in the afternoon, Hutchins stepped out of the courthouse with a stack of documents, still talking to the county clerk beside him. He walked toward the wagon, distracted by conversation, reaching for the driver's bench. Bass stood quietly beside it, head bowed, posture obedient. Then, in a single, fluid motion, one that Otto Breener would later describe as identical to the way Bass struck molten iron on an anvil, with perfect economy and devastating precision, he lifted a bundle of iron chains on a wagon bed and swung them in a wide, brutal arc. The chains struck Hutchins on the side of the head with such force that, according to the clerk's sworn testimony 3 days later, he dropped like a puppet whose strings had been cut. Bass didn't hesitate. He released the chains, seized a coil of rope in a burlap sack, and climbed onto the wagon's driver's seat. Before anyone nearby could fully register what they'd seen, he snapped the reins, sending the horses forward at a trot that turned into a full gallop down the eastern road, leading toward the dense forest along the Sulphur River. The clerk bolted into the street, shouting for help as people rushed to where Hutchins lay motionless in the dust, blood pooling around his skull. A doctor examined him and declared he was still alive. Barely. Moments later, a rifle shot rang out, the old signal that a slave had escaped. Within minutes, the alarm spread through Texarkana like wildfire. By sunset, 18 armed men had gathered outside the courthouse, a grim mix of plantation overseers, professional slave catchers, and bounty hunters lured by the $300 reward offered by Hutchins's brother, who lay unconscious with a fractured skull. They placed command under a man named William Taggart, a veteran slave hunter known throughout the South for never losing his quarry. For 20 years, Taggart had chased fugitives across Louisiana, Mississippi, and Arkansas. He traveled with 6 vicious dogs trained to track and immobilize human prey, and carried a customized shotgun loaded with rock salt, meant to cause agony without killing the property he was paid to retrieve. But that night, Taggart made a fatal miscalculation. He believed Bass to be like every other runaway, desperate, reckless, driven by fear instead of reason. He split his men into 3 squads. 6 would follow the main eastern road, 6 would cut to the timber to the south, and the last 6, led by Taggart himself, would circle north to intercept Bass near the Indian Territory border, where many runaways sought refuge. It was a solid plan for hunting a frightened man. Against Bass, it was suicide. The first body was discovered 48 hours later. A farmer found it at the bottom of a ravine 3 miles off the main road. The dead man, Douglas Patterson, one of those who'd taken the timber route, had been strangled with such force that his throat was crushed. His rifle, pistol, and knife were missing. What disturbed the locals even more was the way the corpse had been positioned, arms spread wide across the path, as if to warn those who followed. Taggart's group came upon the body around noon on November 5th. He examined the scene carefully, reading signs like a man whose life depended on interpretation. Something in what he saw unsettled him enough to send 2 riders back to Texarkana for reinforcements and bloodhounds. The rest pressed on, Taggart and 3 others following what he believed was Bass's trail heading northeast. That night, they camped beside a narrow creek, keeping careful watch. Each man took a turn on guard duty, rifles ready. At dawn, Taggart awoke to find one of his men missing. They discovered him 20 yards from camp, dead, killed by what the later inquest described as manual strangulation after a violent struggle. His weapons and ammunition were gone. That was when Taggart realized the truth. He wasn't chasing a fugitive. He was being hunted. The revelation came too late. Over the next 4 days, 11 more men died in the Arkansas wilderness. The second group, those who followed the main road east, were found scattered across 3 miles of forest. 3 had been strangled. 2 had died from blunt force trauma, struck down by stones or clubs fashioned from tree limbs. 1 had drowned in a shallow creek, held underwater with calm, deliberate patience. Every weapon was gone, every pouch of ammunition emptied. The pattern began to emerge, pieced together later by the county sheriff and a former Confederate officer summoned to make sense of the massacre. Bass hadn't been running. He'd been executing a calculated campaign of elimination. His tactics suggested the discipline of a trained soldier or a mind of extraordinary natural strategy. He studied the way pursuers moved, predicted their choices, and turned their own methods against them. The decision to split into smaller parties, meant to trap him, had only made them easier prey. Bass picked them off one by one, using the terrain, the darkness, and fear itself as weapons. Even more chilling were the traps he built along their paths, deadfalls and snares designed with craftsman's understanding of balance and trigger weight. He stole horses from 2 groups, using them to move swiftly between locations before releasing them again to confuse the trail. And in several cases, it seemed Bass had hidden close enough to watch his pursuers for hours, studying their behavior, waiting for a precise moment to strike. William Taggart was found dead on November 9th. The search party that discovered him had finally brought in skilled trackers and 23 armed men with military experience. It made no difference. Taggart had been killed in his bedroll, strangled as he slept while his companion lay only 15 feet away. The killer had entered and left without waking the sentries or the dogs. The weapons missing from the scene included Taggart's prize rifle and 2 pistols, now part of the growing arsenal Bass was assembling. Among the searchers was Captain James Hardesty, a former Confederate officer, recalled from the front to take over the hunt. Hardesty inspected the site with a soldier's eye. His written report to the county commissioners, still kept in the Arkansas Historical Society, contains this chilling observation. The fugitive exhibits tactical skill beyond most soldiers under my command. He shows patience, planning, and a willingness to take calculated risks. Most troubling of all, he kills without hesitation, indicating either complete moral detachment or a level of rage that burned away every trace of ordinary human restraint. I believe, Hardesty wrote, that we are dealing with a man who has accepted only 2 possible outcomes, victory or death, and has sworn to make his pursuers pay the highest possible price before either. By mid-November, the fugitive had become a legend. Locals began calling him Bass Reeves, adding a surname that meant bailiff or steward, a bitter irony considering his systematic destruction of everyone who represented law and order. By then, 14 men were dead. The original $300 bounty rose to $500, then $700. But by that point, even seasoned slave catchers refused the assignment. The name Bass had become something whispered rather than spoken aloud. Rumors spread like wildfire through the plantations. Some swore he'd once served under a Confederate officer and learned soldiers' discipline. Others insisted he'd been trained by native trackers. And some, lowering their voices, claimed no man could move or kill the way he did, that Bass had made a pact with something darker. But the truth was far more terrifying. For 6 silent years, Bass had watched and learned, turning observation into weaponry. He studied how patrols thought, how men move when they believe themselves masters, and how they falter when fear took hold. He learned the strengths and breaking points of iron, the leverage of bodies, the limits of men, and somewhere in that silence, he decided that every lash, every chain, every command would one day be answered in blood. Eventually, the military got involved, not officially, but through Confederate officers on leave who saw the manhunt as a chance to restore control among the enslaved. If one man could kill 14 pursuers without punishment, what message did that send to the hundreds of thousands still bound in chains across the South? Captain Hardesty was joined by 2 other officers, and together they assembled 32 men, former soldiers battle-hardened, armed with military-grade rifles, and organized like a proper combat unit. For 2 weeks, they scoured the territory between the Red River and the Sulphur, using tactics borrowed from frontier warfare against native tribes. Sweeping formations, overlapping search patterns, and fortified night camps with multiple sentries. They found traces, cold fire pits, animal bones, the faint prints of boots, but never the man himself. He was a ghost moving at the edges of civilization, leaving signs but no sighting. Hardesty's personal journals, later donated to the Arkansas Military History Museum by his descendants, revealed a chilling truth. Bass wasn't just hiding. He was waging his own private war. While soldiers swept the wilderness, he moved along its periphery, approaching isolated farms and backwater settlements under cover of darkness. He didn't strike. He observed. He listened. He gathered intelligence. On the night of November 28th, he appeared at a small homestead 10 miles south of the search zone. The farm belonged to a free black family, the Rayburns. Their account, recorded decades later, described a tall, silent man stepping from the darkness, armed to the teeth yet radiating calm rather than panic. He asked for food and information. The Rayburns, frightened but compassionate, fed him cornbread and dried meat. During that quiet meal, Bass spoke more than anyone had ever heard him speak. He asked about patrols, about which families might offer refuge, about the location of Union troops. By then, everyone knew the war was shifting. The Union held the Mississippi, and freedom, if it existed, lay east across 100 miles of enemy territory. The Rayburns told him of a hidden settlement along the Arkansas-Louisiana border, a fragile community of escaped slaves protected by Union gunboats. But the path there wound through hostile plantations and Confederate checkpoints. The journey was suicide. Bass listened silently, thanked them, and vanished into the woods. But he didn't head east. He turned back toward Miller County. Hardesty's journals describe his bafflement at that move. Every tactical instinct said Bass should have fled as far and as fast as possible. But instead, he was returning to the most dangerous place of all, the place he'd escaped. The reason became horrifyingly clear on the night of December 3rd, when a Hutchins plantation came under attack. It happened around midnight. Most of the estate, enslaved and free alike, was asleep. Bass approached from the east, through dry cotton fields that rustled like whispering ghosts. Witness accounts and physical evidence later revealed that he had spent several nights observing the property, mapping its weaknesses, noting its routines. The overseer, Harold Vickers, maintained a small night patrol of 3 armed men. Bass avoided them entirely. Moving silently to the stables, he set about his work. Investigators would later find the remnants of oil-soaked rags and bundles of kindling, materials Bass had clearly prepared in advance. The fire spread fast, consuming the dry timbers and driving the terrified horses into a frenzy. The watchmen shouted. Bells rang. Men rushed from their quarters. Overseers, servants, even Robert Hutchins himself, now recovered enough to stumble outside. All eyes turned toward the burning stables, the chaos, the screams of animals. And while every gaze fixed on flames, Bass slipped through the compound with purpose. He went first to the punishment house. The door was locked from the outside, standard practice to keep the condemned sealed inside until morning. That night, 2 enslaved people were held there, accused of stealing food and awaiting their discipline. Bass broke the lock with tools he'd carried with him, opened the door, and spoke quietly to those inside. Then, without hesitation, he turned toward the overseer's quarters, a small building near the main house. Inside, Harold Vickers was running toward the fire. The rage consuming him had burned away every trace of restraint. Whoever this man had once been, he was now something else entirely, a force driven by vengeance and survival. His world had narrowed to 2 choices, victory or death, and in his mind, anyone who pursued him would pay the steepest possible price for trying. By mid-November, people had begun calling him Bass Reeves, though the name Reeves, meaning bailiff or steward, carried a bitter irony, given how many men of law and order he'd executed. 14 were dead by then. The bounty for his capture had risen from $300 to $500, then $700. Yet even seasoned slave catchers were refusing the hunt. Whispers spread to the plantations, each tale darker than the last. Some swore he'd once served a military officer, learning discipline and tactics. Others said he'd been taught by Native American trackers. A few went further, claiming he'd struck a deal with unholy powers, that no mortal man could move so silently or kill so precisely. The truth was simpler and far more terrifying. Bass had spent 6 long years in silence, watching, studying, absorbing everything around him. Every motion, every mistake, every cruel act. He had turned them all into lessons. He learned how patrols moved, how hunters thought, how arrogance clouded judgment. He spent time in a forge, mastering metal, understanding stress and breaking points, both of steel and of men. And somewhere in those 6 years, Bass made a vow. If freedom came at the price of blood, then those who treated humans as property would pay it in full. Soon, the military took notice. Not officially, but Confederate officers on leave saw the manhunt as a way to restore fear among the enslaved. If one man could kill 14 pursuers without consequence, what message did that send 1,000 still in chains? Captain Hardesty and 2 fellow officers gathered a force of 32 men, veterans with combat experience, armed with proper military weapons, and trained in coordinated tactics. For 2 weeks, they swept the land between the Red River and the Sulphur, using methods honed in wars against native tribes. Tight formations, overlapping patrols, fortified camps with sentries at every angle. They found traces, old fires, butchered game, footprints circling through the woods, but never the man himself. Bass was everywhere and nowhere, a phantom that stalked the edges of their world. Hardesty's journals, later donated by his descendants to the Arkansas Military History Museum, reveal that Bass was fighting a war of his own design. While soldiers scoured the wilderness, he lingered on civilization's edge, visiting lonely farms and small settlements under the cover of night. He didn't seek combat, he sought knowledge. On November 28th, he appeared at a small farm owned by the Rayburns, a free black family living 10 miles south of the search zone. Their account, written decades later, tells of a man who stepped from the darkness armed to the teeth, yet calm and deliberate. He asked for food and for news. Terrified but compassionate, the Rayburns shared what little they had: cornbread, dried meat, and information. During that quiet meal, Bass spoke more than he had in months. He asked about patrols, about families who might shelter fugitives, about the position of nearby Union forces. Even in remote Arkansas, everyone knew the war was shifting. Union troops now held the Mississippi. Freedom, if it existed, was east. The Rayburns warned him that the road to freedom stretched over 100 miles through hostile land, past plantations, patrols, and military posts. Bass listened, thanked them, and slipped back into the dark. But instead of heading east, he turned back, toward Miller County, toward danger itself. Hardesty later wrote he couldn't understand it. Every sensible choice said Bass should flee. Why go back? The answer came on December 3rd. That night, the Hutchins plantation erupted in chaos. Around midnight, as most slept, Bass approached from the east through dry, chest-high cotton. He'd been watching for nights, learning every weakness, every lazy guard. The overseer, Harold Vickers, had 3 armed men patrolling the grounds. Bass bypassed them, heading straight for the stables. What followed was pieced together from witness testimony and evidence. Bass had prepared oil-soaked rags and kindling, designed to ignite fast and spread faster. Within minutes, flames engulfed the stable, and panic horses screamed as a fire tore through the structure. Guards and overseers rushed to fight the blaze. Even Robert Hutchins himself, weak but alive after his earlier injury, stumbled into the night. Amid the confusion, Bass moved like a shadow through the compound. His destination, the punishment house. Inside, 2 enslaved people awaited morning discipline. Bass broke the lock, opened the door, and spoke briefly to them, words no one would ever record. Then he slipped toward the overseer's quarters. Vickers, realizing too late that something was wrong, doubled back toward his post and met Bass in the darkness. What happened was heard by many, seen by none, a struggle, a short cry, and silence. At dawn, they found Vickers' body, strangled, like Bass's other victims. On his chest lay the cold branding iron he had once used to mark runaway slaves, now placed upon him like a mark of judgment. By sunrise, the fire was out, the compound in ruins, and Bass was gone, along with 6 freed souls from the plantation, including those he'd released from the punishment house. They vanished into the night, following the man who'd shown them that the price of freedom could be paid in blood, not fear. The attack on Hutchins' plantation transformed Bass Reeves from fugitive to legend. Across Miller County, the enslaved whisper about the man who fought back, who freed others, who moved through the dark like smoke. White planters reacted with panic. Patrols multiplied, slave catchers demanded fortunes, and men slept with rifles at arm's reach. But Confederate authorities had a problem. The war was draining manpower. Every soldier chasing Bass was one less fighting the Union, and Bass had proven that hunting him came with deadly consequences. 14 men were already dead, a heavy toll for a county stripped of fighting-age men. So Captain Hardesty changed tactics. Instead of chasing Bass, he planned to trap him, setting a perimeter across the region. Bass, he reasoned, had to eat to rest, and eventually move east toward freedom. Hardesty placed guards at every river crossing, coordinated checkpoints across counties, and waited. For 3 long weeks, nothing happened. No sightings, no attacks, no sign of life. Hardesty assumed Bass was hiding, wounded, starving. That winter's cold would do what bullets could not. But Bass wasn't hiding. He was adapting. He learned of Hardesty's net through whispers carried by the enslaved, a vast, unseen network of communication known as the grapevine telegraph. Through field hands, servants, and free black travelers, Bass discovered patrol schedules, checkpoint maps, and even the design of identity papers that free men carried. On December 18th, a free black farmer named Samuel Hayes reported that his papers had been stolen. It seemed a small crime, but it changed everything. Bass now had documents that would let him walk openly in daylight, and the nightmare in Miller County was far from over. If this story chills you to the bone, share it with someone who loves dark history and untold truths. Hit that like button to support the series, and subscribe so you don't miss the next chapter, because what happened next took the legend of Bass Reeves even further into shadow. On December 22nd, he crossed the Sulphur River just 10 miles north of Hardesty's watch line. Days of careful observation had shown him the gap, a 40-minute window during the daily shift change. Disguised as Samuel Hayes, with a horse taken from an isolated farm, he passed unseen. By Christmas Eve, Bass was 40 miles east of Miller County, beyond anyone's reach. He'd entered the chaotic zone between Union and Confederate lines, a no-man's land where law meant nothing. The 6 people he'd freed had scattered, just as he planned. Small groups drew less attention. Alone, he could move faster. Night after night, Bass traveled east through forests, swamps, and secret black settlements. He was patient, calculated, silent. On January 7th, 1863, Bass reached the lines of the Union Army, the camp of the 3rd U.S. Colored Troops in eastern Arkansas. Their official log still contains an entry for that day. A refugee from slavery arrived, reporting the deaths of 14 men during his escape. Colonel Samuel Thompson interviewed him personally, noting in his journal, "An individual of remarkable composure and capability, expresses no remorse for the deaths, calling them acts of war." When asked if he felt guilt, Bass replied, "I feel what any soldier feels after battle, relief to be alive, and satisfaction that the mission was complete." That mission was freedom, taken by force because peace had never been an option. The Union offered him a place among them, and he accepted. Bass Reeves fought for the rest of the war as scout, informant, and soldier. His reports describe discipline, skill, and silence about the past. When the war ended, he disappeared, one of countless freed souls who vanished into the uncertain promise of a new world. But Bass Reeves' story didn't end there. The transformation was immediate, and the years between 1863 and 1865 revealed dimensions of Bass Reeves that even his flight through Arkansas had not yet fully exposed. The Union Army did not simply accept escaped slaves into its ranks without careful scrutiny, especially not those who arrived claiming to have killed 14 pursuers. Colonel Thompson's initial interview with Bass was followed by 3 more, each conducted by different officers, each probing for inconsistencies or signs of embellishment. What emerged from those sessions, later documented in reports rediscovered by military historians in the 1970s, was a detailed and unwavering account. Bass described each killing with precision, the method, the location, the circumstances, and the tactical reasoning behind his actions. He sketched maps from memory showing where the bodies could be found. He listed the weapons he had taken and explained how he had modified some for better concealment or efficiency. The officers conducting the interviews reached a unanimous conclusion, recorded explicitly in a report dated January 15, 1863. This individual is neither boastful nor remorseful. He describes acts of lethal violence with the detachment of a craftsman explaining his work. We assess him as highly capable, potentially valuable for irregular operations, and completely reliable within the scope of assigned duties. We also assess him as someone who should never be given reason to consider us enemies. That final observation proved prophetic. Bass was assigned to a scout unit operating in contested territory, the fluid, dangerous borderlands between Confederate and Union control, where information was currency and survival depended on the ability to read a situation before it unfolded. Scouting suited his nature perfectly. He moved through landscapes populated by people who looked like him, spoke his language, and had every reason to aid the Union, yet also every reason to fear Confederate reprisals. His ability to appear and vanish, to read men and moments, to decide without hesitation, all the skills he had honed during his escape translated directly into battlefield efficiency. His service record included commendations from 3 different commanding officers. One, dated July 1863, read, "Corporal Reeves located and mapped Confederate supply depot coordinates, resulting in a successful cavalry raid. Entered hostile territory alone, gathered intelligence through observation and conversation with local colored population, returned with actionable information that proved completely accurate." Another, from March 1864, stated, "Corporal Reeves volunteered for a reconnaissance mission considered extremely high risk. Returned with intelligence on troop movements that allow repositioning of artillery, likely preventing significant casualties in the ensuing engagement." But there was another side to Bass Reeves' wartime service, one not reflected in official records. This hidden dimension surfaced only decades later through interviews with veterans of the United States Colored Troops. Bass, it seemed, maintained a quiet network of communication with escaped slaves and free black people across Arkansas, Louisiana, and Mississippi. During his missions, he passed along information about Union positions, safe routes to freedom, and the shifting military situation. More significantly, he sometimes undertook unauthorized missions with objectives that had nothing to do with official intelligence and everything to do with personal reckoning. A veteran named Isaiah Washington, interviewed in 1903 for a project documenting Black Civil War service, recalled an incident from the autumn of 1863. Bass had just returned from a reconnaissance mission when he learned that a slave catcher named Robert Chenoweth was operating in the area. Chenoweth was one of the professional hunters who specialized in pursuing fugitives deep into Union-held territory and returning them to Confederate owners for substantial fees. His reputation for brutality exceeded even the savage standards of his trade. He had apparently taken part in the original pursuit of Bass back in Miller County, but escaped death only because he had been away on another job when Bass executed the 14 men who had hunted him. According to Washington, Bass left camp one evening without authorization, carrying only a knife and moving with unmistakable intent. He returned 3 days later, silent, offering no explanation. A week afterward, word spread to the Union camp. Robert Chenoweth had been found dead in his own encampment, strangled in his sleep, his dogs poisoned, his weapons and papers missing. No one officially linked Bass to the killing, but Washington remembered the moment clearly. We all knew the way he sat quiet that morning when the news came, cleaning his rifle with hands that never trembled. We knew, and none of us said a word. Chenoweth had dragged more than 60 souls back into slavery, and whatever happened to him in that darkness was justice of a kind no court would ever provide. This pattern, it seemed, repeated itself several times during the war. Slave catchers, overseers known for their cruelty, Confederate officers who had ordered executions of captured black soldiers. Some of them turned up dead under circumstances suggesting the work of a professional executioner rather than the chaos of combat. Military investigators occasionally looked into these deaths, but in the turmoil of war, with casualties mounting and priorities elsewhere, a dead slave catcher or brutal overseer rarely warranted more than cursory attention. The clearest evidence of Bass's private war surfaced much later, in 1992, when renovations at the Miller County Courthouse uncovered a cache of old records. Among the tax ledgers and property deeds was a journal kept by James Hutchins, the younger brother of Robert Hutchins, who had managed the remains of the family plantation after Robert's injury. The journal covered the years 1863 through 1865, containing periodic references to the Reeves matter and mounting concerns about security. In an entry dated November 1863, exactly 1 year after Bass's escape, James wrote, "Harold Vickers' brother, Thomas, arrived today asking questions about the circumstances of Harold's death. He's heard rumors from soldiers returning from eastern Arkansas, stories about a colored scout in the Union Army who matches descriptions of our former property. Thomas believes Harold's killer is not only alive but actively serving our enemies. He wishes to pursue the matter, but I have counseled him against it. 14 men pursued Reeves, and none returned. Whatever his grief, Thomas Vickers would be wise to let the dead lie. Thomas Vickers would have been the 15th corpse. Some debts, it seems, must remain uncollected, because the cost of collection outweighs any possible reward." But Thomas Vickers did not heed that warning. Union Army documents reveal that in January 1864, a civilian was captured near Union lines, armed with a loaded rifle and carrying papers identifying him as Thomas Vickers of Miller County, Arkansas. He claimed to be a Confederate sympathizer gathering intelligence. Under interrogation, however, he admitted his true purpose. He was hunting one specific man, a Union scout named Bass Reeves, whom he believed had killed his brother. Colonel Thompson himself signed the interrogation report that described what happened next. The prisoner was brought face to face with Corporal Reeves under controlled conditions. Upon seeing Bass, the prisoner grew agitated and accused him directly of murdering his brother, Harold Vickers, during his escape from slavery. Reeves did not deny it. He responded calmly, "Your brother took part in chasing me, intending to return me to bondage, or to kill me trying. I defended myself with the means I had. If you choose the same path he did, you'll meet the same end. Otherwise, you have a chance he never took, the chance to walk away and live. After the confrontation, Thomas Vickers was transported to a prisoner exchange point and released to Confederate custody. Whether he took Bass's advice remains unknown. His name never reappeared in subsequent military records, though he is listed in Confederate pension applications after the war, suggesting that he survived. But the encounter revealed something essential about Bass Reeves' psychology during this period. He was not haunted by his past. He carried it with him, owned it completely, and offered neither apology nor justification beyond the cold logic of survival. As the war drew toward its final year, Bass Reeves' reputation within the colored troops had grown to near mythic proportions. New recruits heard tales of the man who had slain 14 slave catchers during his escape. Veterans who had served beside him told other stories about his patience on reconnaissance, his uncanny ability to move through hostile territory unnoticed, and his habit of sitting silent through long conversations until asked a direct question, at which point he would answer briefly, precisely, and return to silence. That silence extended to his past. Among men who had all escaped bondage, Bass was remarkable for how little he shared. Others spoke openly about families left behind, about the masters they had served, about the perilous routes that brought them to freedom. Bass said nothing. When pressed, he would simply reply with some version of, "That life ended when I took the chains off Hutchkins's wagon. What matters is what comes next." And what came next, as the war ended in April 1865, was the same choice that faced 4 million newly freed souls. Where to go, what to do, and how to build a life in a nation that had defined them as property for 2.5 centuries. For many veterans of the United States colored troops, the choice meant staying near the places where they had served, using military connections to secure land or work. For Bass Reeves, it meant complete separation from everything behind him. The final verified military record of Bass Reeves is dated June 18, 1865, a discharge certificate noting completion of service and a physical description. Bass Reeves, colored, approximately 35 years of age, height 6 feet 2 inches. Identifying marks include scars across the back consistent with whipping. Served with distinction in the 3rd United States Colored Troops from January 1863 through June 1865. Commended for reconnaissance work and intelligence gathering. Authorized for veterans' pension upon reaching eligible age. After that, the historical trail fragments. Scattered references appear, though it is uncertain if they all point to the same man. A B. Reeves is listed in the 1867 Memphis City Directory as a blacksmith. A Bass Reeves appears in an 1870 Fort Smith, Arkansas newspaper article about a property dispute. And in 1875, records from Oklahoma Territory mention a deputy US Marshal named Bass Reeves. Some historians question whether this lawman was the same man who had once fled Miller County 12 years before. What is beyond dispute are the echoes of his story in the communities that live with its aftermath. In Miller County, the white population dealt with the Reeves matter through collective amnesia. The 14 dead men were seldom mentioned. Their deaths were simplified, distorted, or quietly forgotten. Those who knew the truth shared it only in hushed tones among family, guarded by the shame of having lost fathers or brothers to someone they'd been taught to see as inherently inferior. But among the formerly enslaved people across Arkansas and the neighboring states, the story endured, preserved in every detail, passed from voice to voice, from generation to generation. It was retold in churches, around hearths, and in quiet family gatherings. The details may have shifted with time, but the heart of it remained. One man refused bondage, fought with relentless precision, killed every man sent to reclaim him, and walked away free. The story carried many meanings. It was inspiration, proof that resistance was possible. It was warning. Freedom demanded terrible costs. And it was testimony to a truth the defenders of slavery had tried hardest to deny, that intelligence, discipline, and deadly skill were never determined by skin color or station. The psychological impact on those who had known Bass personally was profound. Otto Briner, the German blacksmith who had worked beside him on the Hutchkins plantation, gave an interview to a Memphis newspaper in 1871. Reflecting on the 6 years he had spent teaching Bass advanced blacksmithing techniques, he said, "I believe I was training a fine worker. I did not realize I was arming a weapon. Every skill I taught him, how to read a lock's mechanism, how to measure metal strength, how to use leverage for greatest force, he absorbed and stored away for future use. When I learned what he'd done after escaping, my first feeling was horror. My second was professional pride. Admiration. He had taken theoretical knowledge and turned it into practical genius under conditions that would have broken most men. My third reaction, the one that still haunts me, is the recognition that if I had been in his position, forced to endure what he endured, I would have done exactly the same things or tried to, though I doubt I would have survived as he did." The documents that piece together the full story of Bass Reeves are scattered across dozens of archives, courthouse basements, and private collections. Reconstructing them demands the same kind of patient, systematic discipline that Bass himself showed during his escape, gathering fragments, fitting them together, and uncovering the patterns that reveal the larger truth. The effort is made harder by deliberate concealment. Officials in Miller County and surrounding areas clearly made conscious decisions to minimize the documentation of the incident, understanding that detailed records would stand as permanent evidence of their failure to recapture a single escaped man, despite the vast resources they devoted to the hunt. But even the absence of documentation tells its own story. The Miller County Sheriff's records from November and December 1862 show an unexplained gap. Routine entries resume in January 1863, without any mention of the missing weeks. The county commissioner's meeting minutes from that same period list expenses related to fugitive recovery, but provide no further details about the fugitive, the operation, or its outcome. Tax ledgers record 14 death certificates filed between November and December 1862, but the causes of death are written only as misadventure, accident, or simply deceased. The families of those men, however, kept their own accounts. Estate settlements, property transfers, and pension applications, now preserved in state archives, reveal the human cost of pursuit. Douglas Patterson, the first man Bass killed, left behind a wife and 3 children. Within 2 years of his death, they lost their farm, unable to sustain it without his labor. William Taggart's widow applied for a Confederate pension in 1868, citing hardship from her husband's death in service to the state. Her request was denied, as Taggart had never been formally enlisted. Slave catching, no matter how dangerous, did not qualify as military service. The collective economic impact on Miller County was severe. 14 men represented a significant portion of the region's enforcement and labor management power. Their deaths, combined with the chaos following Bass's attack on Hutchins' plantation, led to a breakdown of discipline that worsened as Union forces pushed deeper into Arkansas. Word of Bass Reeves' violent resistance spread among the enslaved, inspiring new escape attempts. Some succeeded. Others were captured and subjected to increasingly brutal punishment as owners tried desperately to maintain control over a population that now understood its freedom was near. Robert Hutchins never recovered from the trauma of Bass's assault. Medical records from a Memphis physician, preserved in that city's archives, described treating Hutchins in 1864 for persistent headaches, memory lapses, and severe paranoia. The physician's notes portray a man gripped by terror, convinced that his former property would one day return to finish the work begun with that iron strike. Patient maintains loaded weapons at all times, the doctor wrote. He startles easily, suffers sleeplessness. Physical examination shows a healed skull fracture with probable permanent brain damage. Psychological condition appears rooted in trauma and in the dawning realization that the social order he believed unshakable is collapsing around him. Hutchins sold a plantation in March 1865 at considerable loss. Buyers recognized that the slave economy was dying. He moved to Texas, bought a small farm, and died in 1869 from complications related to his old head injury. His obituary, printed in a Tyler, Texas newspaper, made no mention of how he sustained it. It described him only as a former Arkansas planter who relocated after the recent unpleasantness. The Hutchins plantation itself underwent a transformation emblematic of the South's wider upheaval. During Reconstruction, parts of the land were sold to freed people through federal land redistribution programs. By 1870, the original 4,000-acre estate had been divided into 37 small farms, most owned and worked by black families. The plantation house was purchased by a northern teacher who came south to open a school for freedmen. The slave quarters were torn down, their lumber reused to build new homes. The punishment house, where Bass had freed 2 captives during his midnight raid, was burned to ground in a ceremony that descendants later described as a necessary cleansing of cursed earth. Physical traces of Bass's journey through Arkansas surface occasionally in surprising ways. In 1873, a farmer clearing land near the Sulphur River uncovered a cache of weapons hidden inside a hollow tree. 3 rifles, 2 pistols, ammunition, and a knife, all wrapped in oilcloth. They matched descriptions of weapons taken from Bass's pursuers, suggesting he had buried them during his escape. Unable to carry everything, but unwilling to leave tools of death for others to use against future runaways. In 1889, workers digging the foundation for a new courthouse in Texarkana uncovered what appeared to be a long-forgotten campsite. A shallow depression covered with branches, offering concealment and visibility in equal measure. Inside were bits of leather, possibly from shoes or satchels, blackened stones likely used for cooking, and rusted fragments of metal tools. Local historians speculated that it had been one of Bass's hiding places during his flight, though definitive proof was impossible. The most remarkable discovery came in 1938, when a descendant of Otto Briner donated his ancestors' papers to the Arkansas State Historical Society. Among them was a letter Briner had written, but never mailed, dated December 1862. In it, he reflected on Bass's escape and the killings that followed. I am troubled by what Bass has done, yet I cannot bring myself to condemn him. For 6 long years, I worked beside him, teaching him the craft, believing I was shaping his hands while never realizing the depth of the mind behind his silence. He never complained, never raised his voice, never revealed the careful calculations turning behind his eyes. Now I see that silence for what it truly was, a strategy for survival. A single misplaced word, a flicker of emotion, even a brief moment of distraction could have brought punishment or death. So he wore a mask of obedience, quietly observing, learning, waiting. And when the moment came, he acted with precision born of patience. The men he killed thought they were hunting property. They died discovering they were chasing a man who had decided that life in chains was not life at all, that death was better than bondage, and that anyone seeking to drag him back deserved no mercy. We condemn him for this, but what other choice did he have? Should he have returned meekly to the whip, beg for compassion from those who had built their lives by denying it? I think now of the locks I showed him how to study, the mechanisms I taught him to take apart, the lessons in force and leverage I shared, never imagining how he would use them. I armed him with knowledge, unaware that others had already armed him with purpose. Every overseer who struck him, every master who sold him, every hunter who pursued his people. The system itself forged him into what he became, and when it could no longer control him, it paid the price. History may condemn Bass Reeves harshly. He took 14 lives, men with wives, with children, with families who mourn them still. Yet I wonder whether history will be honest enough to see the truth, that those men chose to uphold a system built on human suffering. They hunted Bass knowing that his capture meant a return to a life worse than death. And still they went after him. They accepted the lie that some people were born to be owned. Bass shattered that lie with violence. Because what is slavery itself if not violence made lawful and respectable? I am no philosopher, only a craftsman. But I know this. The man I once taught to shape iron possessed intellect and strength equal to any I have met, no matter his color. The system that claimed to own him was built on a falsehood, that people of African descent were incapable, that slavery was natural rather than brutal. Bass destroyed that falsehood through action. 14 men died learning that the enslaved could plan, think, and execute with deadly precision. Thousands more learned it through his escape. And one day, millions will understand it as this war tears down the very institution founded on that lie. Yes, I am troubled, but not surprised. The real surprise would have been if someone with Bass's mind and will had remained docile under conditions designed to break the human spirit. Instead, he broke free. And I believe generations to come will debate who he truly was. A killer or a liberator, a monster or a hero. But I know this. He was human. Entirely, unmistakably human. And when humans are forced into impossible circumstances, they will do extraordinary things to survive. Breener's letter never reached its intended recipient, his brother in Pennsylvania, but survival offers a glimpse into the heart of one Southern man wrestling with the realization that those he was taught to see as property were, in fact, his equals. What became of Bass after June 1865 remains a mystery. The many records bearing his name may point to one man who chose his own path, or to several who share it by chance. No photograph survived from that era to confirm his identity, and the sparse descriptions, height, scars, skin, could fit countless others. Some believe Bass deliberately erased his trail, knowing that his reputation as a killer could draw vengeance. Others say he simply vanished into the anonymity of freedom, one among millions trying to build new lives in a nation reborn. Yet one theory endures, that the man known later as Deputy US Marshal Bass Reeves of Oklahoma Territory was the same who escaped Miller County. That lawman was legendary. He arrested over 3,000 outlaws, killed 14 men in self-defense, and became one of the most respected marshals on the frontier. The numbers alone, 14 deaths in flight, 14 in service, invite speculation. The skills he displayed as a marshal, tracking, surviving the wild, quick, decisive action, mirror perfectly those that once won his freedom. And perhaps the mindset of a man who had once fought slave catchers would easily adapt to fighting criminals in a new world. But history offers no proof. The Marshal Bass Reeves claimed Arkansas birth and freedom during the war, yet never spoke of his life in bondage. When asked, he replied, "What I did before I wore the badge doesn't matter. Judge me by what I do now." Whether they were one man or two, both Bass Reeves, the fugitive and the lawman, proved the same truth, that intellect, strength, and courage know no color. Each shattered the myth that defined worth by race. Both defied the world that had tried to limit them, and both challenged the very idea of what black men could achieve when given a chance. And the legacy of the Miller County incident extended far beyond the story of one man. Across the post-war South, formerly enslaved people passed down tales of Bass Reeves, sometimes by name, sometimes calling him the Blacksmith, sometimes simply the man who killed 14 and walked away free. These stories served as a psychological counterbalance to the degradation of slavery and the enduring oppression of Jim Crow. They proved that resistance was possible, that the master class was not invincible, and that a single individual determined and capable could overcome overwhelming odds. For white Southerners, especially in Arkansas, the tale carried a different lesson. It was a warning. Systems built on violent subjugation inevitably create their own resistance. Treat human beings as property, and rage will eventually manifest. Underestimate your opponents based on arbitrary traits like skin color, and the consequences can be fatal. The 14 men who died pursuing Bass made a choice when they accepted the assignment. They chose to uphold a system of human bondage, to deploy their skills and strength to maintain that system, to hunt someone who decided that death was preferable to continued enslavement. They died because they underestimated him, because they assumed superiority based on race rather than ability, because they entered a contest they could not comprehend, against a man who had spent 6 years preparing for exactly this challenge. Whoever Bass Reeves became after the war, he left a story that could not be erased. Despite the efforts of those threatened or embarrassed by it, the record survived in scattered archives. The memories endured in oral tradition. The essential truth remained. One man rejected bondage with such effectiveness that 14 men died trying to recapture him. And the institution of slavery in Miller County, Arkansas, never fully recovered from the demonstration that enslaved people could think, plan, resist, and win. This story reminds us of the most dangerous histories, the ones most deliberately hidden, most carefully obscured, most conveniently forgotten, often reveal truths that society would rather bury. The tale of Bass Reeves and the 14 men who hunted him exposes the violence inherent in slavery, the potential denied by racism, and the terrible cost paid when one group of humans decides that another exists only as property. It shows us that official history often conceals more than it reveals. The silences in the record speak as loudly as the facts themselves. Some debts, accumulated through centuries of injustice, are eventually paid in ways that shock the conscience, mirroring the very violence that created them. What do you think of this story? Do you believe every secret has been revealed, or are there still untold truths buried in Arkansas courthouse basements, in family papers, in oral traditions yet to be documented? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you were captivated by this tale and want more stories that challenge our understanding of history, capability, and the human capacity for both oppression and resistance, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and share with someone who loves mysteries. See you in the next video.